All right, hello everyone. I'm Brooks Rayford, president of the North Carolina Technology Association, or NC Tech. We have adapted to the COVID-19 situation by shifting some of our larger events to later in the year, and we've converted other activities to virtual programming. We also have begun adding new virtual sessions, some for our full membership and some catering to smaller peer groups, and so far these have been very well received. Be sure to keep up with our offerings at nctech.org/events. As part of this effort, we have launched a web-based series of briefings and discussions called Executive Conversations. Today is the latest installment of that format with about 100 registered or more, and I'm glad you're all able to be with us. We are recording this session and we'll post it on our website. Our special guest today is Representative Jason Saine, a Republican member of the North Carolina House of Representatives, and he represents District 97 in Lincoln County. Representative Saine joined the House 9 years ago and has risen rapidly in leadership. He is currently the senior chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, co-chair of the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee on IT, and most recently is co-chairing the Economy Working Group of the newly formed House Select Committee on COVID-19. I'll be asking him about the impact on the state's finances and operations, on the economy, and the use of technology in serving citizens, as well as other topics that I'm sure will come up. We are very pleased today to have as our sponsor for the session AT&T. Trey Rabin is president of AT&T North Carolina, and he is supposed to be with us today, and if he joins in a bit, I'll ask him to say a few words of greeting to you, and also a couple of comments about the impact on the demands for their service and on their business. I want to thank him very much for doing that for us, longtime supportive member. As we move into our discussion, I want to invite our listeners to use the Q&A function to submit succinct questions for Representative Saine, and I'll do my best to filter those and pose some of them. Note that there is a separate chat function. Please use that only if you have technical issues or questions, and my fellow staff members will respond to those, but use the Q&A function for questions. As I mentioned at the start, Representative Saine is one of the most senior members of the state legislative leadership and wears several hats that make him a key part of the state's response to the economic impact that we are experiencing. So Jason, welcome back to NC Tech. You're great to be with us given the demands on your time. I wanted to start actually at a more individual level. This may impact some who are on the call today directly or their families or acquaintances. You know, in the past 4 weeks, over 600 or right at 600,000 North Carolinians have filed for unemployment insurance. And for reference, at the height of the Great Recession, we hit 100,000 in a month. So it's a dramatic increase over that time. The federal government has supplemented the weekly amount of unemployment that a person can receive. But tell us a little bit about what the state is doing or is planning to do to provide relief or enhanced benefits for those who are directly affected.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. And it is quite overwhelming. You know, they've gone from 1,000 calls a week to 1,000 calls an hour at the department. So it's been quite the challenge. It's been a little overwhelming. You know, from a computer system standpoint, the website crashed multiple times, wasn't designed to handle that kind of traffic. The phone systems, you know, their call center only had so many lines. So knowing that, in the meantime, they have certainly ramped up. They've gone more to the cloud, which I'm glad to see. I just wish it would have happened prior to, but we'll adapt and innovate in the process. And then also contracting out with some of our private providers for some of the phone services. So we're trying to answer as many questions as we can, help people navigate that process. Compounding that problem has been the fact that although the feds passed the law, the CARES Act, it still took about a week and a half for some clear guidance from the feds to you know, interpret what the law that Congress passed and then implement that. But good news is we've got a pretty resilient fund. We've got about $3.5 billion before this started in our reserves for the unemployment insurance that employers pay into the system for their employees in situations not quite such as this, but it'd certainly be used for this. But to anticipate any downturns in the economy when people lose their jobs. More than that, you know, legislators are kind of the front line of the interface with state government. When it doesn't work for our constituents, we're the first people they think to call. And so we've spent a lot of time, our staff is deployed across the state at this point. Mary Stewart Sloan, who works in my office, she's a native of Huntersville, North Carolina, so she's back at home, though she lives in Raleigh. She's back with parents. I think that was a pretty safe move on her part. Clark, who works for me, is in Raleigh area, but we are managing. We have gone quickly to many Zoom calls and WebEx calls and everything else, and every provider in between. I've got multiple platforms now resting on my desktop, but whatever you come to me with, we adapt to that. But we're doing constituent meetings that way. And then we started our first ever committee. You mentioned the working group in the introduction. Our working group was the first to ever have an online committee meeting at the legislature, and do that via, we were using WebEx, so a Cisco product there. Did that, and then we're having, of course, our sidebars and our kind of meeting with staff and some of those things as we work through the legislation. But we're gearing up and getting ready to go into session April 28th. That presents challenges as we also have to practice social distancing. We don't want to jeopardize the health of the folks who work for us. Certainly don't want to jeopardize our own health. We've got families to go back to. I know people don't believe that about politicians, but we're real people too. And so we're gonna go in with a much scaled down schedule, kind of wait this thing out through the summer. We have to partly because the way that we've now delayed the deadline for tax filings and so forth. Can't work on a budget till you know what you have, and we'll do some emergency measures in the meantime. Take care of the needs that we most definitely have to take care of right now, and then move on with the business of the state.
Well, you touched on several things I was going to ask you about, so I'll pick up on a few of those. Going back to the start on the unemployment compensation, some states are running low on funds that are dedicated for that purpose. You indicate that we may have a high demand for those funds, but we also, as a state, have several $1 billion unallocated. There's $1 billion in the rainy day fund, thereabouts, another couple of billion because we did not pass a second year of a 2-year budget, so no change in the budget, and that frees up some funds to use in some fashion. There's been a report from the legislature's own economists that we expect about $1 billion or more of a hit to the state's coffers. And so clearly some of those funds will be needed just to cover shortfalls in that regard. But on the unemployment side, we hosted a webinar recently with Dr. Mike Walden, who's a noted economist in North Carolina. I believe you were on that webinar, may have heard his comments. And he was asked at the time what he thought, what his models were showing in terms of likely unemployment rate peak. And he said he initially had thought it would not pierce 10%, as he put it, and now he feels it will, not necessarily a lot more than that, but about that, which would be a pretty sizable chunk. And the question is, how long will folks be affected? How many of those people are truly unemployed fully versus have seen reduction in hours or been furloughed for periods of time? It's my understanding that the rules have been changed to allow people to apply for unemployment in those situations when that may not have been the case before. So just quickly, can you circle back on that topic of how North Carolina would handle the funding of unemployment demands if it does peak and stay high for any period of time?
Yeah, that's going to be a real challenge for us. I mean, like I said, we're better off than most states, honestly, because the budget, we didn't get to a budget agreement that could sustain a veto or even something that we could all agree on last time. Mm-hmm. We have the CR that continues funding of state government. So most regular folks didn't really miss anything. If you're not paying attention to state government, you didn't necessarily feel the pinch there. Good news, if there's a silver lining in all of that, though we spent a lot of time in session and a lot of back and forth and a lot of grinding of teeth and tears shed. But the good news for people in our state, that our fund is a lot better funded than a lot of others. But that's not an unlimited source of money. And to your point, I mean, if we can, with this high of an unemployment rate, we could easily exhaust those funds as well. So, this conversation is quickly shifting from shelter in place to how can we, reboot the economy? How can we start at least from a bare minimum standpoint of we want to do it in a safe way. We don't want to jeopardize anyone's health. We certainly don't want to overwhelm our healthcare system. But at the same time, people are itching to go back to work. We're seeing now protests. There was a protest at the government complex this week. And I'm hearing from a lot of small businesses, mom and pop operations, that this is not only how they get their livelihood, but this is kind of their definition of self-worth. They're used to interacting with their customers. They want to see their customers. They want to get back to work. You know, I'm the homeschool principal, also the lunchroom director and everything else right now too at home. My child's at home, and he goes to class upstairs. I go to work downstairs in the basement. So we're navigating that just like a lot of other folks. But we've got it's kind of like having energy just contained. It's ready to get out. I think that can help us as we devise a way to do that, a smart way to do that. We can help mitigate some of these costs and get people back to work with the federal match, or not really match, actually $600 more than the around $300 that North Carolina is doing. It's generous, and it's good to help alleviate some of people's nerves and encourage them to stay at home. But at the same time, it's going to make a real challenge for employers too when they go back out looking for a workforce. If they get the okay, the green light to go back to work, you know, getting folks back into the system and working is going to be a challenge. So we've got a number of challenges before us. Our working groups are trying to tackle those, get our mind around those. So, but I mean, Dr. Walden's right. I mean, it is, all the numbers look that it's going to be a little higher than that. So that's something that we have to plan for.
Jason, tell me a little bit then about this notion of particularly small businesses that are right on the edge a lot of the time anyway. Under the best of circumstances, they're not cash flush. Ordinarily, they're making enough to cover payroll and rent and basic operations. And most small business owners, many of them are not even taking a salary, or they take a nominal one in order to have the business grow. But in this environment, there was an economist recently, a national economist, so it's not North Carolina specific, but said the average small business has 3 weeks of cash normally. Right. So here we are in a situation where we're more than that into this situation. What kind of relief to businesses are there? We talked about unemployment, which is to individuals. The federal government has the SBA loan and the Paycheck Protection Act. Are there things under consideration by the economy working group or the legislature as a whole that the state can do? Maybe that there was a fund announced recently, I think, that might speak to this. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so Golden Leaf, very early on, Golden Leaf Foundation had made available $15 million to loans to small businesses. Mm-hmm. We know that was just a start. When they announced it, of course, we certainly praised it, but also we're cognizant of the fact that was not going to be enough to help small business. And these are bridge loans. They're low interest to no interest loans that do get paid back eventually, but something that can help these small businesses. Just this week in our economic working group, we drafted legislation to add another $25 million to that. And with the realization that also may not be enough, but we're also trying to measure our response so that we see, the feds are talking about another loan package, another rescue package that may come out of Washington. So we don't want to miss opportunities by just because we've been fiscally responsible. Just remember that when Washington hands out money, they've got it from somewhere, and that's the states. So they're really redistributing our money back to us. We want to be very judicious in the way that we operate and how that we spend money. So, but we're going to make that $25 million available. I think we'll get buy-in from the Senate, get that passed pretty quickly. But that's one step, and then we'll stand back and measure and see what we need to do next.
Well, you mentioned something else earlier I wanted to touch on, and that is the delay in tax filings. The federal government did this initially, and then I think most states have followed suit, including North Carolina. So instead of April the 15th being the deadline to file a tax return and pay if you owe, it's now going to be 2 months later than that. The question, or 3 months later, is it July? Yeah. And so, right. So the challenge, that's an opportunity and a challenge. A lot of people may not realize that over 70% of people who file an income tax return get a refund. And so it actually delays a distribution from the state if a lot of people delay their filing. On the other hand, if all that delay in filing pushes out further clarity for you and other budget writers about what sort of revenue we're looking to have in the coming year and what tweaks to the budget to make. Someone has asked in the online chat, and it ties into this question, those who aren't familiar with how North Carolina budgets should know that North Carolina passes a 2-year budget. We have a long session and a short session, and those terms mean that in 1 year, the legislature meets from January through the summer and develops a full 2-year budget among other actions. And then they come back the next year in the late spring into the early summer and they amend or adjust the budget to take into account revenues, needs, and so forth. Well, that's the year that we're in this year. We are in the tweaking year, and you're coming back on April the 28th because that's what you're slated to do, but you'll have less information than you normally would have. So tell me how you'll address this double-edged sword.
Well, it is, you've laid out the challenge. I mean, and to give you more perspective, right at the 1st of March, appropriation chairs were meeting with staff, getting a review, looking at some of the department requests where we maybe needed to expand some things in the budget. We've got some tech projects that are out there. We've got some capital needs that we have to take care of. But we were kind of, that was our focus. And we were sitting on a big surplus and projecting more surplus. In just a month and a half, that has changed incredibly. So our focus, is really my co-chair in the House, Donnie Lambeth from Winston-Salem. He and I meet regularly in online meetings with our staff, getting updates, budget updates. We're probably going to see an 8 to 10% reduction in our revenues. You've got sales tax. It's going to be incredibly impacted because no one can go shop anymore at their regular spots for getting food and some of the necessities, but not really pouring into the economy. And then, of course, your tax revenues, your income tax revenues may be okay for this coming year, but you're going to see the following year drop off. So we've got to be very cautious and not overspend. We don't want to go back to people who are already suffering economically. We don't want to go back to our businesses, to our individuals, and say, hey, we need more tax money from you, because one, they really probably don't have it, and two, they're barely getting by when we do restart the economy. So these are the things that we're kind of juggling, and it is a juggling act, but it is somewhat of a blessing to have that little new cushion in there, given where we're falling in the calendar year of dealing with this crisis. So those are some of the challenges.
Well, there's some hidden impacts too. They won't be so hidden in the long run, but for right now, you made an interesting observation about how the sales tax revenue, which North Carolina has historically been quite dependent on, we've changed that over time. But we now tax more things, but our rate is lower, so it's tried to mitigate that up and down impact that we sometimes see in normal years.
Yeah.
Well, this is really going to be a big hit, and not only sales tax, but I haven't put gas in my car in 2 weeks. Yeah. The DOT is funded through the gas tax, and so people aren't driving the way they were. They're not funding our highway improvement and repair and so on either. And DOT has had some real struggles with having enough funds on hand to satisfy current demands. And you add this to it, that could be a huge challenge and problem for the state that will far outlast this downturn.
Absolutely. And not just the fact that that's how we pay for DOT, but then think about how we, it's the projects, it's the people that are employed, that are building the roads, that are doing the repairs. And that, a lot of that's, contracted out to the private sector. And so that will also have an impact. So again, people, I think, will hope for the best, and they should hope for the best. But I think folks need to be mentally prepared to know that, our state's going to take a while to recover. We may be ahead of everyone else, but we're still going to have some pain points. And look, when the economy's retracting and private sector's retracting, we're going to have to look at government services. And we'll make the best decisions we can make, but we also just can't spend money we don't have. We're not like the federal government. We can't, just print money.
Can't borrow.
So, that's a tough choice for us to have to make, but we'll make those choices. And we also have to keep a rainy day fund that we can't just expend that money, because, if you're living on the coast and you've gone through a few of the last couple of hurricanes, that state response is a big part of that. We've saved for that. We've certainly planned for that, and we've done the best that we can. But no one could be prepared for this virus that's hit us. So those are going to be the challenges. I haven't put gas in my car in forever either.
Right.
And I back it out of the garage and wash it just to have something to do, and then put it back in the garage. But that's no way to fund roads in North Carolina.
No, it is not. An interesting question just came through that relates to some of this. Not only are we not driving as much and we're not going out to eat as much, we're not going to stores. We're not going to stores as much. And so one of the questions that has been submitted is, will this almost accelerated habit we've all gotten into of doing so much virtually using e-commerce, is there a risk that will be an even more substantial percentage of transactions going forward such that the retail shop, the retail business, the retail establishments will suffer. And what does that impact on state tax revenue? Because the way those are taxed sometimes varies.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, you do things enough times over and over again, it becomes a habit, right? And so once people have adjusted, we're a family that was buying a lot of things online already. It's convenient. I travel a lot. Wife's at work. We've got our challenging schedules, and so there's a lot. We'll buy our groceries online. She'll set out kind of the parameters, and then I go back in and add a few things. And then my son, the 11-year-old, will go back in and add things. And of course, he'll take things off, but it's still at at a local supermarket. But so it's just out of convenience. But this is going to change a lot of businesses. So I think one, we need to understand there's going to be a short-term change, and I mean change in revenue, change in how we shop. But at the same time, your restaurants, any other place where people meet and go in large numbers, they're going to be changing their business models, and they have to, and that's going to change employment as well. The future looks like something we'll innovate into. We certainly will be innovative, but at the same time, it's going to be a huge disruption. When we talk about disruption in business, this is the biggest you could get. But we'll see. Those who will thrive and innovate will survive. And sadly, though, we'll see some businesses go away, and that will impact our revenue.
Well, in addition to business going away, so many businesses have had to dramatically reduce their staffs, furlough employees, and so on. And a question that has come through while we were talking about this very topic is there any appetite or discussion around extending unemployment for beyond the 12 weeks, which North Carolina has as a limit? Not every state has the same limit. We're on the low end of weeks allowed. Is there discussion about re-examining that as we move forward to make sure people don't have a total drop off in support once that 12 weeks hits?
Right. Now, there is. I mean, it is something. I mean, again, we've got limited resources, so we have to be judicious. But at the same time, we've got to deal with the situation we're in. I do think that's some of the angst and anxiety over not getting back into business as quickly as we can. We all want to measure what's safe and what's not safe. So I no way want to suggest that we just go back and turn the switch on and act like nothing's out there, because we do know that this is a serious virus and it can impact us all, workforce and everything. Yep. But we'll have to look at that. We're also looking at, let's think about the additional costs from an education standpoint, not just at K-12, but our community colleges are adapting and providing content and resources for students. Our university system, they're restructuring how they're going to operate, at least in the near future, but it may change how we do things well into 2-3 years from now. But all that will come at a cost. So we're continually reevaluating. And it's also why we've taken a very cautious approach. It's probably good that we're not in session, but we are meeting at the houses. We're at least considering these issues, yep. but we can't immediately take action so that we don't overreact, or we don't compensate on one place and then miss something somewhere else. So it is truly going to be a juggling act. It's something too that, as we look to our private sector folks and for their knowledge about how markets work, how economies work, making sure that we at least provide a pathway from a regulatory standpoint, either just get out of the way, get state government out of the way and let them get back to work, or what can we do as a state to provide a lane, a highway to get to where we need to get to. So these are all things that we're going to be considering well into the future past this first couple of months of the legislature going in.
Well, the governor this week observed that, I think it's a pretty good analogy. It's not like we're going to have a light switch that cuts back on. It's going to be a dimmer switch. It's gradual. That's frankly how we phase down. There was a time not long ago when the rule was you can't have gatherings of more than 100. Then it was 50, then it was 20, then it was 10, now it's 5. So the odds of going back to wide open on a Monday afternoon are pretty slim. We probably will gradually start to see a reintroduction of in-person meetings. Restaurants can open, but only have 20% capacity. You must sit 2 tables apart. All that kind of stuff is likely to happen. And so the rapid fall off of jobs, the shedding of jobs when places had to lay off immediately, probably won't reoccur as fast. It'll be more gradual because the demand for labor will be a little more gradual. Let me shift to e-citizenry. That's the third topic I mentioned that we would talk about today. The government procures and deploys a lot of technology in the course of a year, depending on how you count it. North Carolina has an overall budget of in the low, around 20 billion, give or take, and $1.5 billion of that is IT or tech related. Some of that's personnel, but a lot of that is the services that we provide. It was noted the other day that, in fact, one of my cars is in this situation. My annual property tax is due, and that means that my inspection is due. And so in order to get my car inspected, I have to violate the stay home order in order to then pay my taxes on time. So of course, the legislative leadership has said there will be retroactive action when you all come back in late April to waive penalties and deadlines for those who are caught in that bubble. And that may not be as easy to solve electronically. You have to get your car inspected. But there are a lot of functions that citizens have to engage in: business licenses, marriage licenses, just basic operations of life. And often you have to go to an office to do it. You can't do it all online. What kinds of things does the state do, or can the state do, to better enhance e-citizenry, the ability to conduct business with the state or provide services to citizens who need them using technology?
Yeah, that's a great question. Things we've been moving toward anyway in state government.
Right.
If you look back a couple of years ago, I helped kind of shepherd the effort of just being able to renew your license, your driver's license online, which people love. They don't have to go sit at the DMV and wait in line to get that handled. And there's so many more things that we can do, and the way that we interact. We now have different ways to authenticate, two-factor authentication. We know who you are when you interact with state government. We can confirm your identity. Because of the investments we've made in technology. Now ramping up and forcing agencies to think about how they interact with citizens in a different way, and really focusing on what private sector is already doing in many instances. If I'm shopping on Amazon or if I'm on Walmart.com, they're already suggesting things to go with the things I'm already buying. It's like they can read my mind, and I'm sure that they can to some degree, based on some tendencies and some of the the AI that's involved. State government has to be that smart too. We, like with DMV, on that renewal of license online, if you've had to do that recently, and gone to their website, there's a chat bot on there that is very smart, anticipates what your questions may be, makes it pretty seamless. Getting citizens ramped up to do that. I never thought for a minute that I would get some of my colleagues in the legislature to have an online meeting where we're using video chat and voting and discussing, and there was a lot of resistance to that over the years. But because we had to, we were forced to do so. Within a week, our ISD department had us up and running, where they were training legislators from their home using laptops and iPads and whatever device they were connecting with. And we were doing that. So, you can teach old dogs new tricks. I think we're going to teach state agencies new tricks because they'll realize that they have to innovate. But then also the citizens will have I think at the end of the day, have a better experience when dealing with state government if we can innovate quick enough. And I think that we can. And again, this is where we're going to lean on our private sector partners. It's not what we do. It's not the state government's just not that agile. But having a crisis forces us to get to that place. We're already reaching out to partners. I've held a lot of online meetings over the last couple of weeks, just talking to different providers about what they can help the state do and transform how we're doing business. So I think that's what, there's some silver linings in some of these things. And I think that's it. If we can just get people to where they don't have to think about state government and it just kind of happens and it's easy, what a nice welcome change that would be.
Well, we've had someone actually submit a question along the lines that you were just discussing around private sector partners being very integrated with the state, have been for a long time, certainly will need to be now more than ever. And that is, as you know, a number of the members of the Tech Association are companies that do business with the state or would like to. And one of the questions that's been submitted is that the state has has several big IT projects underway with contract and full-time staff. The question is it too early to say how these projects will be affected? Do you see them being affected if they're already underway or have already been contracted?
Well, we'll have to prioritize, obviously, and figure out what is most important in terms of continuity of state government, continuity of services. things that we just have to do. A lot of those projects are just things that we're just going to have to fund, and particularly if they're underway. There may be some places where we can push back some things, looking more towards some of our capital expenditures, new buildings, some of those things probably will be delayed. But then, there's some things that are just critical. Western Carolina, we've got a boiler issue problem that has to be fixed. That's capital expenditure. Right. Those are some of the things we have to invest in. So it's going to be, we have to be very thoughtful in how we plan what we're going to do. There are some things when we talk about deadlines, software that's just out of date. They're refresh on equipment and refresh on how we do business. If you take the employment security website, just for instance, I'm pretty sure, don't quote me, but I believe it's based on a COBOL system. So we've got some outdated technologies out there that we're going to have to ramp up and change. So it's kind of a give and take on this. You'll see some places where we might have to regress a little bit or pull back, but then also some places where we just have to, by definition, go and fund new projects that we have to do because of where we're at.
Well, Jason, you mentioned you all have started voting in committee and so on, but doing so virtually, which as you noted, has historically not been permitted or not always well taken by some fellow members, but you're having to, the circumstances change. So I have a near-term and a long-term question for you about actual voting. We have an election coming up. North Carolina was fortunate in a way in that we moved our primary to be earlier than it had been historically. So our primary wasn't so affected by the advent of COVID-19. Other states have not been so lucky. So our next big election is the November election, the national election and statewide election. So the near-term question is, in terms of the ability to use vote by mail or other methods to allow people to vote without going to a polling place, given that there's some feeling that there very well could be a second wave of the COVID infections, which may be a late fall hit time. We don't know. So be prepared for that, though. Talk a little bit about that. And then I want you to pivot to a longer term question. You have a former colleague, our good friend, Jeff Tart, former senator from the Charlotte area. He would want me to say Cornelius. That's where he's from. And he is a strong proponent. He's an IT guy, an IT executive. He is a strong proponent of things like blockchain or other technologies that can provide a level of security and accuracy of identity when voting or doing any other transaction that far exceeds even an in-person walk up to a desk type of thing. Mm-hmm. And so while that may not be immediately deployable statewide in an election, that would seem to be a thing the state ought to be really accelerating its interest in and maybe even investment in for down the road, and would have lots of applications. But let's talk elections for a minute.
Yeah, no, glad to. And it's something that legislators are getting very quickly up to speed on. An issue that wasn't at the forefront a month and a half ago, now it's here. I've said on just over the last 2 weeks, I think 3 different web conferences just talking about it. What would it look like? How can you provide to the citizens assurances that this is not rigged? It's not. There's not chances for massive fraud. We've certainly had our cases in North Carolina where we had to discuss those issues, and so we certainly want to protect against that. Right? Folks need faith in the system. They need to know that their vote counts and that their vote doesn't count any less than their neighbor. So that's the challenge to us, and knowing what kind of security protocols we can put into place. To former Senator Tart's point, utilizing blockchain or other technologies, we can authenticate exactly who you are. We know who you are as a digital citizen. Those are things that are in place today. And other applications. So government is going to have to quickly adapt to that. What that looks like, I won't say because I don't know yet, but that's certainly something that's being discussed. And the other side of that too is if we get more voter participation, folks have easier access to the polls. You can identify, voter ID has been a controversial issue in the past, but what we're really talking about here when we talk about blockchain is we're definitely identifying who's voting, and you can certainly measure whether they vote one time and then block them from voting again. So you can't have this repeat in terms of fraud. So if we could have, absolute assurance that there's no fraud, I think that takes some arguments away from all sides. So I think that's something that we absolutely have to look toward. whether or not we can gear up to something like that in the short term between now and November, I don't know. I really just don't have that answer. But I do think that that's, we already have a government data analytics center in state government that is utilized by multiple agencies. That it's where citizen data is hosted, and it's where you have a identity within a state system. So we've got some really great assurances, and it's also how we root out fraud. Right. I think the opportunities are there and on the horizon for us to. But like I said before, maybe it's because of this crisis that we're going through that we're forced to innovate and change some things. So I think that's exciting. I think that's also tough for people to just do it the old-fashioned way, and they're used to. I mean, look at early voting. You've got people who I know, my constituents sometimes will go, "No, I'm not doing the early voting. I like to vote on election day." I always think, well, what if you have a flat tire and you wait till 30 minutes before the polls close? Whatever, go vote early. But so it'll take a mindset change just of the voting populace. But I think those are things that can be accomplished, and I think we were already moving that way anyway. So this may just accelerate that.
Well, in terms of demand on the use of technology, I do want to take a quick minute here before I come back to you, Jason. I believe that Trey Raymond is with us, but by phone. So Trey, as I mentioned earlier, is the president of AT&T. And he is a great friend to the association. The company's been a member for a very long time. Trey, I acknowledged you all at the beginning of all of this, but could you say a word of greetings before I get back to Jason, and then also share maybe a word or two about the impact of all of this on your business and demand for services?
Yeah, thank you, Brooks. And again, apologize for the technical difficulties.
Right.
First of all, just want to thank our many partners in the tech community. And we're grateful for dedicated public servants like Representative Saine who are working around the clock during this unprecedented time in our country. At AT&T, we're also focused on keeping North Carolinians connected. Our network continues to perform well, as data and voice usage has shifted, from business and schools to virtual connections at home, connections like the ones we're on today. Of interest, I believe, to many on this call, is what type of network traffic utilization we're seeing. We've actually seen about a 26% increase in network traffic across the core of our network. But interestingly, we've seen a significant increase in voice calling, plain old telephone calling. We've seen a 30% increase in consumer home voice calling, a 78% increase in Wi-Fi calling. And from a mobility standpoint, we've seen about a 22% increase in wireless voice minutes. Those are things that we're hyper-focused on. We've got employees that, day in and day out are committed to making sure that you all, as well as other citizens of North Carolina, have the connectivity that they need. Before I hand it back, I would like to share an announcement that was made on John Krasinski's Some Good Things YouTube show last Thursday. John was highlighting ways that we can support our physicians and nurses on the front lines. He challenged us, AT&T, to offer them 1 month of free service. They've got so many things going on. Give them a free month of service. Let's help them out. We accepted this challenge, and then we added 2 more months to it. We're now offering physicians and nurses on the front lines 3 months of free wireless service through AT&T's FirstNet service. I would encourage everyone on the call, if you haven't had an opportunity to view John's Some Good Things show, it's out on YouTube, I'd encourage you to take a look at it in your free time. It highlights the good that's being done across this country during this pandemic. Again, Brooks, thank you for all that you and the association are doing. Representative Saine, thank you for your work. I know you and your colleagues in the legislature are working around the clock to make sure that North Carolina continues operating. And just on behalf of AT&T, want to express our appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you, Trey. And you did hit on something I wanted to circle back on as we begin to wind down, and that is that a lot of people have cynical views about politicians, and sometimes it's deserved in certain cases, but many times it's not. You're citizens who volunteered to put yourself forward to serve, and we chose you. Jason is a small business guy, and he's a tech professional. He's a volunteer firefighter, has been for many years, and honored greatly for that. and a terrific servant to the sector that we represent and a partner. So thank you for all of that, Jason. As we close out, I want to let our audience know that we've begun reaching out to a variety of leaders to be featured in future executive conversations, and we've already secured commitments from a number of them. Among upcoming guests are the president of Lenovo North America, the mayors of Raleigh and Charlotte in a joint discussion, the CIO of Blue Cross, the North Carolina Secretary of Commerce, the CEO of Bandwidth, a Triangle-based company that just announced a major expansion and a new headquarters, the head of IBM in North Carolina, the owner of the North Carolina Football Club, and more to come. So quite a variety of people who will be giving their perspectives and insights on business in general, the impact of this virus on the economy and their organizations and communities. We'll be adding these to our events calendar as their schedules are confirmed, so be sure to check out our site for these and other offerings at nctech.org/events. If your company or organization is interested in sponsoring one or more of the executive conversation series like AT&T has done today, please respond to the follow-up email that we'll be sending after we adjourn, and we'll include a link to this recording as part of that. So thanks again to AT&T for sponsoring this session, and to Representative Saine for being our guest today, and to all of you, have a great rest of your day.